On June 4, 1943, a train hissed to a stop in Mexia, Texas. On board were 1,850 veterans of Germany's famed Afrika Korps. As they stepped onto the platform, they didn't just enter a new town, they entered a new reality. The streets were bathed in a bright electric glow. Lights burned in homes and shops, a sight unseen in blackout-stricken Germany for years. For Unteroffizier Vera Burkhardt, a soldier who'd fought from France to North Africa, this was impossible. He scribbled furiously in his diary, "The Americans must be lying." No nation at war could afford this much comfort, this much light, but every glowing window, every well-stocked shop, was a silent testament to a truth his government had hidden from him. This single moment in a small Texas town was the beginning of a profound psychological journey that would dismantle everything these soldiers believed. The propaganda they had been fed for years was about to meet the undeniable reality of American power. The journey of disillusionment began long before they reached Texas. In Oran, Algeria, American processing camps operated with a chilling efficiency that rivaled the best of the Wehrmacht. Identity cards were photographed, medical exams were meticulous, and inoculations were given by German-speaking officers. The sheer scale and speed of the operation was the first quiet lesson in American organizational capability. But it was the food that delivered the first real shock. Oberreiter Hans Muir, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, couldn't believe it. In the holding cages, they were served meals that would be a luxury back home. White bread, real coffee, and fresh meat twice a day. This wasn't a special treat. It was standard issue. This abundance wasn't just on land. The Liberty ships that carried them across the Atlantic were marvels of production themselves. The SS Robert E. Peary, for example, was built in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. On board, the prisoners watched in disbelief as American sailors threw away half-eaten steaks and loaves of bread, not to mock them, but because there was simply so much more where that came from. For soldiers conditioned to see America as decadent and weak, these were facts that their minds struggled to process. As their ship approached the American coast, a new revelation struck Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, an aristocratic officer from a long line of military men. He saw a radar antenna rotating above the ship's bridge. This advanced technology was standard equipment on a simple cargo vessel. In that moment, he wrote later, he first suspected the war might already be lost. On August 2, 1943, they arrived at Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia. The docks were a whirlwind of activity, handling more cargo in a single day than the port of Hamburg did in a week. Cranes, trucks, and vehicles moved with a seamless efficiency, all powered by an endless supply of electricity. The prisoners were then loaded onto Pullman coaches for the journey inland. These weren't the cramped wooden boxcars of Europe. They were luxurious, with padded seats and even dining cars. As one soldier, Hedman Radke, noted in his diary, they boarded like tourists, not prisoners. The train became a moving classroom. As it rolled through Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky, the men stared out the windows at a nation fully at war, yet overflowing with prosperity. Factories ran night shifts, their lights blazing. Cities and towns were bright and bustling. Parking lots were full of civilian cars. Every illuminated street corner and every lit-up home painted a picture of normalcy and wealth that directly contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had told them. The shock continued as they delved deeper into the American heartland. In Texas and Nebraska, the prisoners were put to work on farms, where they encountered a level of mechanization that was simply astounding. They saw massive combine harvesters and cotton gins that could do the work of hundreds of men in a fraction of the time. Vast fields stretched to the horizon, each farm powered by electricity, with its own tractors and trucks. The sheer scale of American agriculture was overwhelming. Every roaring tractor and towering grain elevator was another piece of evidence that the stories of scarcity and inefficiency they'd been told were deliberate lies. The industrial sites were even more staggering. At Ford's Willow Run plant, They witnessed a B-24 Liberator bomber, a complex machine with over 1.5 million parts, roll off the assembly line every 63 minutes. At Alcoa's aluminum facility, the electric furnaces consumed more power than entire German cities. The precision, speed, and sheer scale of American industry shattered the myth of a weak, disorganized enemy. It was a display of power so immense, so undeniable that it began to break down the very foundations of their ideology. Even their treatment as prisoners served as a powerful form of counter-propaganda. At camps like Camp Hearn in Texas, their barracks had electric lighting, flush toilets, and hot showers, amenities that were luxuries for many civilians back in Germany. Camp hospitals were equipped with modern surgical tools and penicillin, a new miracle drug that was still scarce on the German front lines. The camp kitchens used electric mixers and gas ranges to prepare thousands of meals a day. The food was consistently abundant and nutritious, a daily reminder of the stark contrast between American plenty and German deprivation. This wasn't just about physical comfort, it was a moral statement. The victors were treating their captives with a level of care that their own government could not provide for its own people. By the end of 1943, as these men worked in American fields and factories, they weren't just contributing labor. They were witnessing the engine of a global superpower up close. American intelligence officials began observing what they called ideological collapse syndrome. The prisoners were beginning to question everything. This transformation wasn't left to chance. The POWs were given access to American newspapers, libraries, and educational materials. Universities like the University of Chicago and Stanford offered correspondence courses, providing intellectual stimulation that had been denied to them under the Nazi regime. They watched American films, which, unlike the rigid propaganda they were used to, often featured self-critique and honesty. This exposure to a free and open society further eroded the ideological walls that had been built around them for years. By the spring of 1944, their understanding of American capability was complete. They saw factories operating around the clock, with a diverse workforce of women, teenagers, and African Americans in roles the Wehrmacht considered impossible. They saw an agricultural system that produced an endless river of food. The German soldiers of the Afrika Korps arrived in America as true believers in their cause. They left with their worldview shattered, not by force, but by the undeniable, overwhelming truth of what they had seen with their own eyes. It was a psychological defeat delivered not on the battlefield, but in the brightly lit towns, humming factories, and abundant fields of the United States. The first weeks at Camp Hearn in Texas were a shock to the system for the German prisoners. Instead of the squalor they'd known in North Africa, they found neat rows of wooden barracks with electric lights, steam heat, and even flush toilets. The camp hospital was a marvel. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, a German chief surgeon, noted the care prisoners received was better than what most German civilians had seen in years. Penicillin, a miracle drug back in Europe, was used freely. Minor infections that would have been a death sentence in the field were treated instantly. This wasn't just imprisonment, it was an introduction to a completely different standard of living. The camp kitchens were another revelation. Walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers, and gas ranges churned out meals for thousands with an efficiency that was simply unimaginable back home. Daily rations included fresh milk, eggs, meat, and white bread. Many prisoners were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of food. A former hotel chef, Otto Krebs, wrote in his diary that on his first day, he threw away more food than his entire family had seen in 3 years. This wasn't wastefulness for its own sake. It was a regulated system ensuring every prisoner got full rations. For men raised on propaganda about American scarcity, the sight of discarded excess was a powerful, silent contradiction. By September 1943, America's wartime labor shortage meant prisoners were put to work. They traveled, often unblindfolded, through the American heartland. They saw endless fields of corn, factories running 24/7, and towns bustling with activity. In a Houston cotton gin, one prisoner watched a single machine process more cotton in an hour than his entire village could in a month. And the operators of this incredible machinery? They were ordinary men, not elites or party officials. Even African-American workers ate meals that would be considered a feast in Europe. In Nebraska's sugar beet fields, it was the same story. Combine harvesters did the work of hundreds of men. A German private, Wilhelm Hoffmann, marveled at a 16-year-old farm boy operating a tractor worth more than his family's entire annual income. These experiences systematically dismantled their beliefs about American weakness and inefficiency. Their exposure to American industry was even more staggering. At a Campbell's soup factory in New Jersey, prisoners saw automated machinery that processed more tomatoes in a day than German factories could in a month. An elderly operator, sipping coffee while listening to the radio, managed a system that would require 50 workers in Germany. Near Detroit, they saw the River Rouge complex, a behemoth powered by 1.5 million kilowatts of electricity daily, churning out jeeps, engines, and tanks. The parking lots, filled with thousands of worker-owned cars, showed that private vehicle ownership was for everyone, not just the wealthy, a concept alien to most Germans. They saw women, African Americans, and even teenagers operating complex machinery around the clock. The industrial might was undeniable. By the winter of 1943, the psychological impact was profound. American intelligence officers began to notice what they called ideological collapse syndrome. Prisoners who once fiercely defended Nazi propaganda began to question everything. The camp newspapers started discussing democracy and post-war reconstruction. Letters home revealed a dawning curiosity about different economic and social systems. Then, when Italy surrendered, Italian prisoners who cooperated were given better quarters, pay, and freedom. A German soldier, Headman Friedrich Schultz, watched his former allies working alongside Americans and even dating local women. He wrote, "The Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated better than we treated them. This democracy appears more honorable than our own system." The contrast was impossible to ignore. Christmas of 1943 was a turning point. 500,000 packages filled with cigarettes, sweets, and toiletries arrived from American churches, civic groups, and citizens. Some communities even invited prisoners to Christmas dinner. Church choirs came to the camps to sing carols in German. This overwhelming generosity from the enemy, from people whose sons they had been trying to kill just months before, shattered the last pillars of Nazi ideology. One German officer, Walter Miller, marveled at the profound humanity shown by the victors. It was a powerful lesson that strength wasn't just about military force. Alongside this, education programs flourished. Over 40,000 prisoners enrolled in classes on English, American history, and science. Universities like Chicago and Stanford offered correspondence courses. Even atomic physics was taught, often by Jewish refugee professors from Germany, with a generosity that one German physicist called incomprehensible. American films also played a crucial role. Movies like The Grapes of Wrath showed a nation grappling with its own problems openly and honestly. This transparency was completely foreign to Goebbels' propaganda machine. The prisoners saw that America didn't hide its weaknesses, and this self-reflection seemed to make the country stronger, not weaker. By spring 1944, prisoners were even participating in war production, strictly following Geneva Convention rules. At the Higgins boat factories in New Orleans, they saw 700 landing craft being produced every single month. The sheer diversity of the workforce continued to challenge their deeply ingrained prejudices. Then came the harvest of 1944. Mechanized wheat harvests produced more grain per farm than entire German provinces. In California, they saw mountains of perfect oranges being bulldozed into pits simply to stabilize market prices. This incomprehensible display of abundance was the final proof. America wasn't just winning the war, it was operating on a different plane of existence. On June 6, 1944, news of the Normandy invasion delivered the final ideological blow. The scale of the D-Day operation, the thousands of ships, planes, and soldiers, demonstrated an organizational capacity that Germany could never hope to match. The country they were taught was decadent and divided was overwhelming their homeland. One prisoner reflected that the defeat was total, not just military but moral and ideological. The Americans had shown them that true power wasn't just force, it was the ability to uphold principles of dignity and fairness, even toward your enemies. By March 1945, secret re-education programs had taken root. Over 25,000 prisoners voluntarily enrolled in democracy courses, preparing for a role in rebuilding a post-war Germany. Former Nazi loyalists were now studying free market principles, civil rights, and democratic governance. They came to America as soldiers of the Third Reich, but they would return home as agents of change, forever transformed by the undeniable reality they had witnessed firsthand. As World War II ended in May 1945, a massive logistical challenge began, repatriating hundreds of thousands of German POWs. The American camps, which had stretched from the Atlantic to the Great Plains, now held men whose worldviews had been turned upside down. They were about to go home, but not to the Germany they had left. The thought of returning to a devastated nation was daunting, yet many were determined to apply the lessons they had learned. The repatriation process was a massive undertaking, organized by the Red Cross and the U.S. military. Prisoners were gathered at central depots for health and documentation checks. American camp administrators were surprised to find morale among the returning men was unexpectedly high. Instead of resentment, many expressed sincere gratitude for the humane treatment they had received. Letters they sent home were filled with respect for the American personnel who had guarded, fed, and even educated them. In mid-1945, the journey home began. Transport ships departed from ports like New York, Boston, and Norfolk. For the prisoners, these voyages were an education in themselves. They witnessed bustling American cities already deep in post-war recovery and were impressed by the sheer efficiency of naval logistics. On board, regular meals and medical care stood in stark contrast to the hardships of wartime Germany. Many kept journals, describing the vast, liberating ocean as a metaphor for the new possibilities they had seen in America. But arriving in Germany was a brutal shock. Cities were in ruins, infrastructure was shattered, and the economy was on the verge of collapse. Food shortages were rampant, and finding housing was a crisis. Yet these men carried something invaluable, a mental blueprint of the abundance, efficiency, and civility they had experienced in the American camps. They had seen what was possible, and now they faced the challenge of rebuilding from nothing, and rebuild they did. In regions like Lower Saxony, returning POWs transformed agriculture. Men who had worked with modern combine harvesters in Nebraska adapted those techniques to what little German machinery remained, dramatically improving productivity. They introduced organized labor systems, crop rotation, and mechanized irrigation, inspired by the efficiency of American farms where a single person could manage vast tracts of land. This transfer of knowledge wasn't limited to the fields. Former prisoners brought American industrial techniques back to Germany's factories. They had seen assembly line optimization, quality control, and mechanization firsthand. In plants producing vehicles and machinery, German engineers began adapting these insights. Concepts like conveyor belts, electric hoists, and automated stamping machines, though difficult to implement immediately due to material shortages, planted the seeds for Germany's future economic recovery. One of the most powerful legacies was education. Many POWs had taken correspondence courses in the camps, studying everything from engineering and English to democratic governance. Upon their return, they became teachers and advisors. Former officers who had participated in political education programs became leaders in local government, their exposure to civil rights and participatory democracy reshaping their ideas of community and leadership. The ideological impact was just as significant. The humane treatment, the educational opportunities, and the observation of a more egalitarian society profoundly challenged the Nazi ideology they had been taught. Back home, these men shared their experiences, sparking conversations that contributed to a widespread transformation in post-war German attitudes. They became quiet ambassadors for a different way of thinking. Personal stories from the time confirm this shift. Otto Bader, a former sergeant, recalled bringing back a blueprint for fairness and efficiency that he applied in his village council. Wilhelm Hoffmann, another veteran, used lessons from American factories to improve production and worker safety at a machine tool company in Stuttgart. Even the cultural exposure had a lasting effect. Hollywood films, jazz music, and Broadway shows they encountered in the camps broadened their horizons, leading them to start music clubs and theater groups that helped revive German culture. Psychologically, the experience was transformative. These men, once cogs in a rigid military machine, had witnessed American individualism, democratic debate, and personal responsibility. It fostered a new sense of empowerment. The contrast between the oppression they had known and the freedom they had glimpsed redefined their expectations for their own society. Historians now recognize this group of repatriated POWs as a key driver of Germany's post-war economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder. They didn't just bring back memories, they brought back practical knowledge, modern skills, and a new perspective that accelerated recovery. The U.S. occupation authorities supported this integration, creating a unique bridge between former enemies and fostering long-term reconciliation. By the 1950s, these former prisoners were integral to the new Germany. They were farmers boosting productivity, engineers modernizing factories, and community leaders promoting civic engagement. Their cumulative effect was a quiet but powerful transformation of their entire country. The story of the German POWs in America is more than a tale of captivity. It's a powerful testament to how humane treatment, education, and exposure to different ideas can reshape minds and rebuild nations. These men returned not just as survivors, but as catalysts for change, carrying knowledge and perspectives that helped heal their homeland. Their journey shows that true influence isn't just about military strength. It's about the power of humanity to inspire, educate, and ultimately transform. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a lesser-known chapter of history. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the past, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you next time.